think I'm unmuted. Is that it? Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. We had a couple of different things that we tried this year. We did take one of the big buckets home with us, the climate and weather bucket, and we basically put a couple of days of lesson plans together, but we really did kind of follow what was in the bucket that Gulf of Maine had already put together for us. So we talked about the differences between weather and climate, and our students were really interested in that because they hadn't really thought about that before. And we, um, went through and talked about the different ways you can measure climate and the different ways that we talked about NOAA and what they do. We talked about averages over time, and we really tried to link it to math, to a math lesson. And then on our that was just over a couple of days. And what our plan was to measure the weather over a period of time. Unfortunately, this is where our lesson fell apart. So I'm at the point where you guys are going to be asking questions. If you have suggestions for me, that would be very welcome. We fell apart basically in classroom management because the data that we wanted to collect was, temperature, precipitation, wind speed, wind direction, humidity, and then just a general description of the day. And what we were going to do was to take that data over time, chart it, graph it, and really have that be a math lesson about how to display your data. But we fell apart with management of collecting the data every day. And I'm not sure why that is. I think that we were a little over ambitious. We tried to have the kids do it morning and afternoon. We tried to manage it between two classrooms and rotate the kids in and out, I think, too much. So I think that's really where we fell apart. But and the other thing that I think that we really thought about was we were going to look at our data and then compare it to historical data. And we kind of fell apart on that end too. So if anybody has done that or would like to talk about how they did that, I'm open to that. But the other thing that we did that was more successful for us was to really prep the kids for the field trip, which we really had never done before. We had just gone. So I think that participating in the 3 days this summer helped a great deal because we really understood you can go and observe, but until you actually do it yourself, you don't really get into it and see actually what the kids are actually doing. So that was really good for us. So we set up on our first day, we did 4 days of prep before we actually brought the kids to the field trip. And we set up something that we call a Table Talk Twitter, which is kind of like a KWL chart, but we do it silently. So we put 4 questions on big chart paper, and the kids move in groups around the room. And the questions that we asked were, what do scientists do? How do scientists think? How do scientists communicate? And have you ever done work like a scientist? And the kids, we break them up into groups of 4, into 4 groups. And they have to write their answers on these big chart papers, and then we rotate them around to each question. So every child gets a chance to answer, and it's not just the extroverts who are answering all the questions. Everybody gets a chance. And they can agree with what other people write, or they can, they just make comments. So we did that just to get their brains moving, and then we just kind of prepped them a little bit with difference between fact and opinion and problem-solving steps and what makes a good question. And then on the second day, we talked to them more about Gulf of Maine and why we were going. And this was the best part, I think, because we now knew about the blog. So we put the kids on the computers right away. And we had them read the mission statement, and we had them go onto the blog and start reading some of the articles about what you guys actually do, or what Gulf of Maine actually does, and the research that they're doing. So they were very excited about the fact that this was a real research institute, a real science institute that they were going to. And they got really into the blogs. I know that they were reading about the new trawl design. Somebody was really interested in that. I think somebody's father was a fisherman, so they were looking at the new trawl design. The tagging monkfish video was pretty popular. And then I think there was, I wrote down how many fish live here. So there must have been an article or a blog about that that the kids really liked. And they also liked the lobster with the half red and half brown. So they read about that. And then when we told them that that lobster was actually at Gulf of Maine, they got really excited. So that really built their motivation to go. We did the systems game with them that we did this summer, and that was a huge hit. It was really important in helping them understand what a system was. I think that helped so much. So they had that before they went. And then, we prepped them for vocabulary. Um, and when they got there, I think they had a lot more information than they normally did, and they were more into it. I think they were really able to participate better because we did the prep. And the best part was when we came back from the field trip, we actually used the questions that we got. I'm trying to remember what you called them, but there was a list of, I don't know, like 20 questions that you guys had typed up for us, and those big kind of broad key concept questions, and we used those as a check-in. So we actually got an assessment on our field trip, and they loved it. So they were really anxious to answer those questions. So did you use or build a model? And then they really talked about the iPads and how they were able to build the systems model on the iPad, and they thought that was the coolest thing, and they could describe it and talk about it. So I think that's really what we got the most was the field trip prep was really essential, and we could talk about it after and really talk about it in terms of research and inquiry, and I think it was better than things that we'd done in the past. So it worked out really well for us. So that's what I have.
Okay, great, awesome. So does anyone have any questions for Sherry? If you do, if you just kind of look to the left-hand side of your name, you'll see the microphone, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can type it in the chat box if you have any questions.
I'm going to unmute me. Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Sherry?
Hi.
Well, I actually did the climate one too, and as soon as you said the collection of the data,
Yeah.
that was where I ran into trouble as well. I had
so glad it wasn't just
plans.
me.
We actually went as far as building our own barometers,
Oh.
and they were going to be, and it was so dry. We had all the snow days, and the water evaporated, so we never got around to getting good data to collect because we were doing stats and math. So I wanted it to go together. So I ran into the same trouble.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how to do that. I think for us it was more of a management issue, and to really the kids too, it had to be independent for us because we had to send them out to collect the data. And some kids get it, and even though we prepped them ahead of time and showed them how to do it, other kids would come back with these papers that didn't really have data. So it was, either messy or they wrote something down and you knew that was not accurate. So we weren't sure really how to manage that.
Yes, and I ran into trouble also with the time of year because we have been having inside recess. So we actually couldn't go outside a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a drag.
Yeah. I'd like to try it again. Now that we've been through a run through, I'd like to try it again and maybe a different time of year. I'm thinking maybe the beginning of the year was not the best time to do this, and maybe it's a springtime thing.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Oh, it looks like there might be one in the chat. So Marie was saying that maybe if you just collect, I think she's trying to say maybe if you just collect the temperature and barometric pressure only to see if they're related every day or every other day. So there's an idea too.
That's not a bad idea. It was maybe we overreached with too many things. Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions, thank you, Sherry, for sharing. So Amanda, if you are ready, I think I'm going to pass it on over to you so you can share what you've been doing for the past couple of months. So Amanda, you should now be the presenter.
Okay. So we started, or I started the first week of school, and we started right off the bat with the systems game. Here, go to here, because we weren't visiting until early October, and I had taken the All My Watershed Neighbors kit from the GMRI, and I started teaching that right away. I did skip some of the lessons because in our school, I just didn't have that much time to do science, unfortunately. Um, and so I really, knowing what they were going to be doing at the Institute, I really focused on systems and our watershed and the species in them. Pre-visit, as I said, I took the kit. We studied what a watershed is, about the watershed we live in, and the habitats in it. We went into the schoolyard and documented with photographs, words, and sketches the species that they found and the habitats that they could describe. And then we went to the Knox Lincoln Conservation Fair, which had an interactive watershed model, which was great. And that all took place before the visit. And these are some of the photos that they took while they were documenting species in our schoolyard habitat. And then post-visit, they went back and they looked at their team data, and they looked at uh, the kinds of questions that were asked. Then they used the 6 research questions that are in the All My Watershed Neighbors kit about what your species eats, their habitat, life cycle, how they're adapted to life in Maine, and why they would be interesting to scientists, which was hard for the kids. So if I taught it again, I would pre-teach that a scientist could actually be them, and the connection to humans. And on the left are some of the pictures of Spot the Difference, which was in the kit, which helped them notice differences and similarities between species, and some of the written reports that they produced after the unit. There were some things I didn't get to do. I had scheduled a visit with a lobsterman, but we just didn't have the time to do that. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Amanda? Okay, well, if there's no questions, then Kathy, if you're ready, we'll kind of keep moving right along, and I will switch it right on over to you. So Kathy, you should now have control of the screen. So feel free to get started when you're ready.
Okay. I have a keynote that I'm going to do here and kind of walk through it. We found that when we went to GMRI, that we were able to research the connections between animals and their food sources, and we hypothesized about what we could do to our earth that affects animals and their food. We investigated how the fish in the Gulf of Maine are affected by many different factors, and we drew conclusions about the future of the Gulf of Maine. Now, this is important because later on, when we talk about our own region here, that we want to do the same kinds of things. And it became a little bit more confusing to the kids to actually think about what we did. So we explored and we attended the conservation fair. We looked at our maps. We went on Google Earth. We looked at charts and data. And we also did some research on the local animals, especially the alewives here. And the kids learned a lot about the local fishing. And that one here in Warren is very important. I did the connections. I called it the connections game. I couldn't think what it was called. You guys call it what now?
We call it the systems
but
game.
it's where we played the game. Systems game. That's what it was. And we played the game there, and it seemed to make all kinds of sense for us to move and interact as the way we were directed. But when I came here with the students in the classroom, the first thing they did is move in real close together, and they were equidistant from anybody they wanted to say because they were so close together. So I tried again later, except I took them out to the gym, tried it again, and then we could see that we had to do the movements, and then we could see the systems, and then we could talk about how that would work, not only with what we were doing, but we chose different animals and different food sources, and we tried that again. A lot more discussion came from it. But I don't know if anybody else had any trouble with trying to play the systems game, but that just wanting to glom in together was a major problem for us. We went to the Union Fairgrounds, as I'd said before, and we learned about the creatures and how animals adapt and how we can use nature without harming it. And as Amanda said, we did use the watershed model, which was nice. One of the things was there was a food coloring stamps, and those were the pollutants. And the kids actually used spray bottles to simulate precipitation, and they would watch the pollutants go into the waterways. And I thought, wow, that seems like they really get it. Well, they didn't. And we learned about when we were there about owls. We had quite an interaction with owls, and we learned that we need to not pollute. And what the kids got out of that is pollution was not using plastic bags, not using 6-ring can holders, and that's what they got of what pollution was, and that was kind of a problem. The students did get a hands-on with the animals, and we talked about how to protect their habitat. But again, you can see the plastic bottles, and they're thinking of pollution that way. We also learned that we can use the solar power to not pollute our earth. And again, I don't think the kids really got that there's a chemical kind of pollution. Here they were showing us how they can recycle with plants. We came back and talked about then how we can have the watershed coming down, and it showed all that with the tributaries. Again, I'm thinking, sure, the kids are getting all of this about what a watershed is, but when we went to talk about our watershed, and here's the actual watershed for Warren, and we could trace it. We actually got Google Earth up and we traced it down. But eventually we went to St. George River we didn't go there. We went on Google Earth to look at it and talk about the alewives. And I had several children whose parents actually caught alewives, and that was their livelihood at least part of the year. And so the kids were very interested and had a lot to contribute. What was the problem is when I start talking about the runoff and getting the pollution into the water from, let's say, herbicides or different poisons that we put into our earth. They didn't understand how it could get from their house into the river. They saw their house as being removed and having no relation to the watershed. So that took a lot of discussion. When we came back after the GMRI visit, we looked at the St. George watershed, as I just said, in Google Earth. And we actually did some research about the alewives and looked at some interesting data about it. And the kids, for fifth graders, this is new to them to be able to actually look at data and interpret it. So we did a lot of interpreting data rather than trying to collect it and have our own data. We did learn from looking at the alewives and looking at the data that we found that we really felt that the alewives had gone downhill for a while, but we're coming back to an upward swing. And again, we talked about and hypothesized why that could have happened. What could have happened to the alewives that made them diminish so much in the area, but eventually make a rebound. And I want to say that the GMRI experience was a very eye-opening one for myself and my students, and I want to thank you all so much for making it possible. It's been a really fun, difficult experience, but I enjoyed it.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kathy. That was awesome. I love what you guys did with the alewives. That sounds like that'd be a lot of fun, and I now want to join your class. Does anyone have any questions for Kathy?
Did anybody else have any trouble with doing the, I keep wanting to call it connections game. What
The
was it
systems
called? The
game?
systems game. Anybody else have trouble with that? No, evidently
Doesn't.
not. Nobody else had any trouble with that. I guess I was the only one.
You just have creative students.
A lot of talking. It was amazing that when I would ask the kids about different things that would pollute, they were stuck on essentially garbage and trash because they had heard so much about the owls and about how they would get caught on the bags or get caught on the six ring things, that thinking about chemicals was a new thought for them, and it was a really difficult concept for a lot of kids.
How did
So
you
fifth grade, what?
how did you do, like you said you used food coloring for and spray
They,
bottles? Did you say like this red one is the fertilizer you'd put on the lawn? Like did you give it a
if
specific
I were if I were to do that again, this was done at the Union Fair where they had that conservation
Oh, okay.
thing for us. Amanda did the same thing, and I thought the woman did a very good presentation and made it seem like it was, pollutants, but maybe she was generalizing too, and we just didn't realize that kids, when they saw the red and the green and blue going in there, they didn't realize what we were talking about.
Mm, okay.
Again, that's something that if I were to do it again, I would make sure they knew.
Yeah, maybe just reiterating that, like, have you ever seen, like, I don't know, your dad put fertilizer on the lawn? This green color is that fertilizer. Like, watch where it goes.
I've got that.
But they had a real hard time, even if I would say, okay, think of a chemical that you could pour into the ground that wouldn't be good for our earth. And if they came up with, let's say, nail polish remover, they
Yeah.
don't see that that would eventually get into the watershed. They think it just goes into the ground and it disappears. So again, it took a lot of conversation
Yeah.
to get around to those concepts. I was starting to say, I think maybe, at least for my class, fifth grade might have been too young for this.
Okay.
Did you have one,
I've got
Molly?
an idea. Yeah. Oh.
Oh.
Um,
Did you have something you want to share, Molly?
yeah, there's I don't know if you've ever heard of this game called The Incredible Journey, but it's a water cycle game, and so it would be kind of cool to see if they would have a better understanding of where their water goes, because you basically roll a die and it sends you either to clouds or the ocean or a lake or groundwater, and they basically collect beads at each place, and so they create a bracelet, and then they have to go through and they'll tell you the journey that their water droplet went on. And that I've played that with like fourth graders, and that seems to be pretty like good for their level. And then there's another game that I've played where you have like, you can pick any animal really, and you have different prey items that you scatter like on the ground, and they have to go and get a certain amount to survive, and there's a predator who's coming in and trying to grab their cup that they're collecting in. And eventually you would add something that's a pollutant so you can decide something that maybe they know about already. but then you could try to maybe like link those games together and talk about maybe how that pollutant could have made it into the food. It could be a stretch, but the water cycle game is a really good one for them to get the idea and really visually see. You can draw it out in the discussion at the end of like where one student's water droplet went, so they get an idea of the cycle of things.
Of where the water would go. It just doesn't go directly. It it would have a source, and then it would go through different systems to finally get to the ocean.
Yeah, eventually, and it really each student has a different experience because it's kind of depends on what they roll in the dice. But
Where do you see that? Where do you get that?
I could look
You make it up yourself.
I'll look up the resource for you and I think Kim has your information, so I'll find that and I'll have her send it out to you.
That would sound great. Sounds great.
Yeah, I'll send it out to the whole group in case anyone else is interested um, in getting it as well.
Then there was also a comment from Marie saying try focusing on non-point and point pollutions first.
Amanda says we read A Drop of Water Around the World. That would be very good, yes.
Okay, are there any other questions? Doesn't sound like it. So, Kathy, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And then Tanya and Marie, if you guys are ready, I'm going to pass it on over to you and let you guys share your story.
Okay. All right. So we went to our teacher conference, and this is what we did. And so this is sort of a map of starting here. You can see, the different. I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously, but these are the big ideas we wanted to get to, and I'd say we got to most of them between the two of us. Mm-hmm. And then these little squares on the rectangle, sorry, on the outside are just things that we could try for each one of those. So we did as many as we could, and then we actually went there and learned about the scientific process, and the kids loved it. They loved using the microscopes. They just had a lot of fun. They had a ball, and they learned a lot, and they just collaborated. We mixed the kids up, so it was good. Then they sent little thank yous, which I had to throw a couple of those in because they're adorable. I like the puffin myself. And then back home, this is before we went, we studied biomes because we were trying to go from, trying to get from a biome to like an ecosystem to more specific organisms and, just go down the ladder sort of that way. So we did some biomes, and we did big ones in our classroom so you could actually walk into them, which was kind of disruptive in terms of your classroom, but it was a lot of fun. So we did it in 3 classrooms, and then we wrote about it. We had the kids write about it. And you can see the savanna here and the coral reef, I think. But the kids really did a lot, and they presented these to whoever would come. And then we integrated with art, and we, I don't know if you can see that whole screen. I probably should have. There we go. We integrated with art, and we did some huge, what do you call these things? Puppets, I guess. And we hung them up. And they're still up, even after Christmas. So just a few of these. That's my favorite, the horseshoe crab. And then we did poetry, and we used, familiar format of poetry. But as you can see, they tried to integrate facts into the poetry. So some of my favorite lines were acting like a paralysis victim. This was one of my really, he's really smart. So I gave him this, oops, sorry. I gave him the sea vase. He had no idea what it was, so I told him he had to, search for it. That was his, and he had to search for it with a scientific name because he couldn't find that much in sea vase. But he loved it. Oops. There's a couple more. I just really like these because I felt like they did this after they'd researched and that they really got some of the. They got it, like some of them were using Vigilis, they were using some of the scientific names, and they really, got the concept. So I like these a lot. And then these are the cards. I probably should put these first, but we use these to, at the beginning when we started, we taped these on their back and they had to guess who they were, and that was just kind of fun. And then once they got them off their back, then there was a little bit of information that they could start their research with. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Tanya because she did some other different things.
So I also start off with biomes in my classroom. We focused on just the big picture and then try to break it down all the way to habitats and to organisms and cells from there. We did biome posters, and the kids had to include plants, animals, human impacts for their biome, climate, all sorts of different facts, and they presented those and we shared those, and they were out in the hallway on display. We also collaborated with the art teacher to make the sea creature puppets. Along with that, I had my students write a report. It was the beginning of the year, so I wanted to get them back into writing, and I can put the report up here to show you. I found it online. It was free, and it's really simple step-by-step report for kids to follow. They just had to figure out, learn about the habitat, what they ate, adaptations, and step by step. And once they put all the information together, it was really nice because they realized that they had just written a report and didn't realize they were doing it as they were going step by step with it. We also took the idea of the Gulf of Maine, and we just finished up Student Treasure Books. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a publishing company where we can have our stories sent off and they're turned into books. And the Gulf of Maine is the theme for our classroom, and students pick the creatures or creature from the Gulf of Maine that they wanted to write about, and they could do it as a nonfiction or fiction book. It was their choice, and they just had to research some information as they went through. And our books are being sent off this Friday, and we'll get them back probably by the end of February. The other thing we did is I went to the Bryant Pond 4-H camp, University of Maine, for an overnight trip. We focused on the watershed and ecosystems there. We learned a lot about what a watershed is, our watershed here in Bryant Pond in the Woodstock area. And it's like so many things at once. I also collaborated with Neil Ward from the Androscoggin Water Alliance, who kind of helped me get Fish for Friends. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that program, but my class will get 200 Atlantic salmon eggs within the next few weeks. And so Neil came and he did a presentation showing us our watershed history for the Androscoggin River. And if anybody's familiar with that, it was extremely polluted in the 40s and 50s, and his slideshow showed pictures of the river with 2 feet of foam on it with dead fish on there, and we talked about how that affected the local fisheries and how the watershed connects to the ocean. And we talked a lot about the alewife shards, cod, how the dams and some of the paper mill factories, other factories, are polluting these sources. And until the Clean Water Act was, in effect, there was a lot of damage done to the ecosystems, which, all of these fish were hit pretty hard. The Atlantic salmon, is endangered due to that. And some of the alewives and the shards is that it's not so much that the population's down, they're not able to return to their natural habitats because of these dams, and some companies are trying to remove those, but the cost is pretty pricey. And they are also trying to install fish ladders. So my students are looking at different designs of fish ladders, also looking at how we can remove some of these dams so the fish that migrate are able to get back to where they naturally were at one time. And the nice connection about the watershed is that our Atlantic salmon, we release them in April. After a few months, we release them into our watershed, and we trace our watershed to the Atlantic, and they have to return to our watershed. That's where they'll come back to spawn. So my kids really are engaged in that, and it's like they're babies. They're worried about them now when they release them. I think that's pretty much it right now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I love the biome idea. That was great. And those were some awesome pictures of all of the different biomes you had. Does anyone have any questions for Tanya or Marie?
Oh, there's a question. Hold on. Where you are? Oh. Oh, yes, writing the report. I think the resource that we showed, the Ocean Animal Research, really helped, as Tanya said. We both used it. Well, we all used it because I have two more colleagues, so we all used it, and it really did help them. There was a question. They said, "Well, what do I do now?" I just answer the question, and then they'd answer the question. So it really did, help them. Because in fifth grade, I've learned over the years that just saying research doesn't work. You have to guide them a lot. So something that's already pre-made like that. So feel free to steal it. It's a great resource. Actually, it was teacher pay teacher, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
and
And it was a few bucks. It wasn't much.
even your
So.
kids who don't enjoy writing so much, it's
Yeah.
pretty easy.
Yeah.
Are there any other
It
questions?
seemed to be a nice mix.
Oh.
You guys seem to have a nice mixture of art and writing and research. It seemed to be a really nice mixture between all of those things for the students.
Thank you. I went to grad school, arts. It was in arts, so it was integrating the arts into everything. It was an amazing program. It's done by Leslie, and it was pretty painless. Once a month, one weekend. So if you don't have your grad degree, it was a really fun way to go.
And I'm a science major, so good combo
Can you
there.
tell?
Okay. Any other questions? Doesn't sound like it. So if no one else has any questions, I will try and get that resource that Molly was talking about out to you guys. And thank you for everyone who presented. Those are all great ideas. You guys did a great job in all the different ways that you did, whether it was using the kits or whether it was coming up with some new ideas or prepping your students. It was great to hear what everyone had to say, and I want to thank you guys all for joining us. And if no one else has anything else to say, then I guess that's it. And thanks for coming.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.